The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
And that created some distrust in me, some real frustration in basically being lied to by an instructor about kind of the.
Hello, I'm your host, Les Bubka. Welcome to Anxious Black Belt, a podcast that focuses on karate, mental health, and everything in between. If you enjoy our content and would like to support us, best way to do that is to listen to another episode, share with your friends, and leave us a review. All this stuff helps the mysterious algorithm to introduce our podcast to new audience. Thank you for joining me, and let's listen to the episode. Welcome, Sensei Ross, or should I say Sifu Ross, because I'm confused with all your titles and experiences. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Les. Please, just Russ. I'm just Russ. Those are things usually my students would call me, but that's you're just you're a friend. So yeah, just Russ, please. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming. It feels like we just spoke a second ago that you've been on every single podcast that I am listening to. And it might be a few repetitive questions, but I will try to do a good job of asking questions you might not been asked before. But I think we have to start with your origin stories and very briefly, how did you get into martial arts and what made you to actually look at it and walk in the dojo and stay for so long?
Yeah. Happy to. For me, I was a kind of a small, bookish child with some asthma and allergy problems, and I was never like the big strong guy that was picked first for sports. I definitely had some serious bullying issues when I was young, so I had some challenges there. So when I had the opportunity with a family friend to start learning some martial art that I don't even know the name of when I was so young at that point. I jumped at the opportunity and then from there sought every opportunity I could after that. So being a young teenager, about junior high school, I had an opportunity to go spend a few months in the Philippines. My grandfather was working over there. I went over there to spend time with him and work at the animation studio he was working at in the Philippines. And I had an opportunity to start training Goju-Ryu there with a Goju-Kai instructor by the name of Iyan Mackenzie. It was a great opportunity, really enjoyed the training. And so trained there for about 3 months. And then I came back to the States and was looking for a school. And I found a school, unfortunately, later I found was not a legitimate school. And that created some distrust in me, some real frustration in basically being lied to by an instructor about kind of what they had learned and what they were teaching. And I didn't know enough in the beginning. It took me a while to figure it out as I started doing research and reading on my own. So that created some real challenges for me to figure out if I was even learning real and good, authentic Goju-Ryu, even Japanese or Okinawan style. So led me to find another school that was authentic Goju-Ryu. Um, and that was good. I enjoyed that. I did start. There were a lot of organizational politics there. We can talk about the reasons why that unfortunately over time went south. But I started reading the works of people like Hanshi Patrick McCarthy and John Sells and other teachers about Goju-Ryu and its evolution, and it got me very interested in trying to make sure I got very excited about trying to find the pure original, so I got fixated on this idea of, well, I was doing Japanese Goju-Ryu and then I was lied to. So I like my passion needs to be about finding the real, true, and original source of the material. So I became fixated on that for a while. And that's led me on a lot of my journey over the years to find good authentic Goju-Ryu, to go to Okinawa to train at the source, to understand uh, what I thought was tradition. Come to find out there are many traditions, and those things evolve all over time in ways that I was never prepared to understand as a young person. And then ultimately led me to the point where I trained long enough in Goju-Ryu that I kind of gave myself permission to do some cross training. And the cross training has become a little out of control in later days. But I love to learn. It's very important to me to continue learning. I enjoy teaching and training, but learning is a lot of fun. So I enjoy jumping in a brand new class and learning a brand new thing as somebody just in line. Um, so I've done a lot of things over the years. It's been about 40 years now that I've been training consistently. Um, a lot of phases, a lot of different mental shifts, a lot of differences in my goals over those years. But I have to say, where I stand today, I feel very happy and comfortable with where I've landed. I don't feel like I've got that kind of, I'm searching for this special something to complete my training. I feel like I've landed in a place where I know who I am and what I want, or at least I feel much more comfortable in that way. Not that that won't change in the future, but anyhow, let me stop there, Les. It's
Yeah,
just a little
that,
start.
that's very interesting, and you sparked up my interest. Totally not with martial arts. Is the Philippines well known for a animations?
There my some of my family was involved in animation since I guess the late 70s, maybe mid to late 70s. Hanna-Barbera was a big company
Yeah.
in on the West Coast. My grandfather got in there very early as a cameraman, worked his way up in the company, and then ultimately became a guy who was. It was kind of interesting what his role was. It was to kind of just parachute into a new country, train people, get equipment brought in, find a facility and build an animation studio. So they were offshoring animation, very early. So he was involved with building studios in Taiwan, South Korea, and then ultimately the Philippines. There are a lot of amazing artists and animators in the Philippines, a lot of very, very talented people. I still have some friends from my time back in the 80s when I was there and the early 90s, working with my grandfather. So yeah, I'm very proud to say my grandfather was an entrepreneur, and he was one of the kinds of business people that I know is pretty counterculture to corporate culture. So he
Mhm.
was a very in my opinion, ethical and well-respected businessman. Pretty much all the people that I've ever spoken to over the years that have ever worked with him or for him were very flattering about his work style, his work ethic, the conditions he created for people, really helping lift a lot of people out of poverty by creating those jobs in these countries. So yeah, just when I see people talk about modern corporate culture, and I've experienced a lot of the negative sides of that. I've also happened to know a few very great business people who treat business in a very fair manner. My grandfather was the first one, and then I've worked with a few other entrepreneurs who have just they're not they're not what the average person thinks of as a business person, right? They're people who they're on a mission to float all boats instead of just their own. And to me, it's a real
Yeah.
pleasure to work with those kind of people.
Do you think that being exposed to that ethical business model impacted your way of running your dojo? Because really, when I look at what you do, it's very honest, very transparent. You share everything online. You giving people access. Um, is that the impact of your grandfather that you started working in that environment? In Poland, we've got a saying: it's not probably not going to be a great translation, but we say that whatever the eggshell sings in a youth, that's what the chick's doing later. That's really
Nice.
bad translation, but
No, no,
you know what I mean,
you get
right?
the sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. Even though with my dojo, with my school, to call it a business is kind of overstating it. I mean, I don't have any employees. It's me, and me
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
almost everything. But from a leadership perspective, like when I think about martial arts, I think about it like a trade or a craft where you could be a great mechanic or carpenter or something. And so many people get excited about becoming good at their trade craft that they then decide to either teach or monetize to create a business around that activity. And what they ultimately find out the hard way is those are all additional overlay skills that are quite difficult, right? And included in teaching and business is also leadership. And it took me a while to understand the difference between management and leadership.
Mhm.
Managing things and leading people are fairly different sets of skills. And I do think that my grandfather's influence, I did have that moment with my grandfather. I was very young, probably about 18. I asked my grandfather, I said, what is the key to your success? Can you tell me, like, can you boil it down? Give me
Mhm.
the essence of what you've learned. Why are you so successful in this way? And your people love you. And he said, I just treat my employees like the very important people they are.
Mm.
So, I think that's the key. You just remember that people are people. We're all in this boat together, although we all have different roles and we're in different phases of our lives. We have different current things that we're trying to accomplish, either for ourselves or for others. This reminds me of politics in a way, right? I think that we um, across the political spectrum, most of us would agree on what the problems in the world are.
Mm.
Where we disagree is our recommended solutions and the priorities of attacking those problems. But we almost all fully agree on what the problem sets are.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important thing when you find that people are having difficulty working together. You've got to remind them of those common goals and use that to kind of bring things back together and foster good discussion, that kind of thing.
Mm. The other thing you mentioned was that your disappointment with finding the non-authentic Goju-Ryu school, and this is interesting for me because I'm coming from the very similar
Mm,
school. So not on
mm,
Goju-Ryu but Kyokushin. So,
right.
so my teacher went up in the ranks of Kyokushin.
Hmm.
Then he splintered off the Kyokushin branch before it became popular,
Hmm. Hmm.
and started his own style. I
Hmm.
think his own style, but
Hmm.
he always didn't have a courage to take ownership of it. So it was like, oh yeah, we met these Russian guys there, they all army, they disappeared, and we have no connection, there was no internet in the times. I don't remember, but so my own exploration of a style was that it's a made up style by my teacher,
Sure.
inspired by great teachers. But
Hmm.
you said you found the original school. For me, wherever I looked, my teacher was the best technically, and I liked. So I kind of had to accept that yes, I'm not from the legitimate source. I don't have a lineage to support it, but at the environment I've been in, this was the best option. So
That's great.
my question is, how have you dealt with your emotions and what did you feel learning that it is not what you've been expecting or not what you've been told?
Yeah.
Maybe kind of mistruths and
Yeah.
misleading you and stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
long question.
No, great question. Yeah, it's as I mentioned, I've been through a lot of mental phases, some of which haven't really been that productive, right? They've been challenging, or they've led me to kind of spin in a cycle for a while before I could figure out a way to kind of break free and advance, in terms of my thoughts and or dealing with reality, right? And part of my challenge is I came into martial arts thinking martial arts were a certain thing, thinking
Mhm.
that people are a certain thing, and casting my own opinions on that situation. And I think, you know, no matter what you do, especially in the realm of traditional martial arts whatsoever, when we say traditional martial arts, you then have to say, well, what is tradition and whose tradition and all these things. And so even using that label is it's very dangerous to use because we all have a different opinion about what that means. And so my early opinions and my early judgments, I now can look back and say, you know what, I should have been a little less judgmental.
Mhm.
I wish I had understood back then what I understand now, because now I can understand why somebody would break away, would change something, would add something, would make the style a little more their own. And that's not um, necessarily a violation of tradition. It seems like the tradition of change is maybe the strongest and most
Yeah.
cohesive tradition we have. And so I think getting to a mindset where you feel at ease with your place in tradition, which tradition you're talking about, how you accept um, what you want to conserve and pass on, what you're trying to honor in the past, and versus the reality of what you bring to the table as a current generation, trying to help things move into the future generation. I think the mindsets around tradition are some of the hardest things that I've dealt with because I came into the martial arts thinking, um, I like to learn from people who have already figured things out. I don't like to learn everything the hard way. The hard way is painful, sometimes deadly, sometimes slow, but sometimes very valuable, obviously, also, right? So there's pros and cons to it. But for me, traditional martial arts was about trying to learn from the people in the past so that I could have a head start in becoming functionally safe, right? So from a self-defense perspective, I wanted those skills. The challenge one of the challenges I had was I got into martial arts and I started learning these. Find an authentic Goju-Ryu school, and I trained there very hard, and I learned great body development and body coordination. But the fighting methodology was kickboxing or non-existent. It was memorized sequences that had pretty much no basis in reality. And they could be easily debunked by just changing one variable. So that was a real challenge, right? Figuring out now, okay, now I've found a good source that's truly traditional, but what they're passing on doesn't seem to make sense or doesn't have a very holistic description of what is the fighting theory, right? What's the
Mhm.
fighting? You would think a fighting style would have a little bit of fighting theory, right? So to say, what is it? Our traditions have all been very haphazard. So I'm a engineering minded kind of person, or at least I have become through the course of my career. And um, I have a difficult time when I feel like the answers aren't
Mhm.
cohesive. There isn't a solid framework. It puts me in a state of frustration. And it's not until I get mature enough to understand that that's okay, that not all the answers have been given to me. Part of the responsibility is mine. The teacher has a very serious role, but at some point, there has to be a handoff to the student in terms of responsibility for their own learning. So um, I've just taken that in a lot of different directions. There are a lot of pieces to that. I'm not sure where you want to go with that, Les.
Mm. Yeah. So again, you said about giving yourself a permission to go cross training.
Yeah,
I've been on the opposite side. I give myself a permission to be a karate person. So my
excellent.
teacher from the day one encouraged us to do other stuff. So I've done judo, jujitsu,
That's
wrestling.
awesome.
And to be honest, I think if I went first into wrestling, I would stay with wrestling. I would never
Mm,
explore karate. But that was a few
hmm
years later in karate. But always been trying to, maybe because it was my lack of belonging to a big karate organization, because we always been independent. Like I said, my
hmm
teacher
Yeah.
created his dojo and his style.
Yeah.
So I always crave that belonging to some legitimate, that's air quotes if you
Yeah.
don't watch it,
Yeah.
thing. So for a long time, it put me on the hunt of the art that I really belong. But in some way, I was always going back to karate. So it took me several, well, nearly 30 years to understand and allow that my heart is in karate and allow myself to be a karate
Mm,
the way I want it to be,
yeah.
instead of trying to look for confirmation and approval of other systems. I don't know if that
Mm,
makes sense. But how
hmm.
how was your thinking of, okay, now I am the Goju guy, the Kung Fu guy, and now I can go and explore those other systems. Can you take us through that journey? I think that ties
Yeah.
up with your with the previous question a little bit as well.
Yeah. And this was quite a while ago. So I think at the time, my thought was that everything I'd heard, considering we're talking about a 40-year span here, the martial arts community, the traditional martial arts community has evolved a lot in the last 10 to 20 years, right? There's been a
Mhm,
lot of evolution, especially due to the likes of people like Hanji McCarthy, um, uh, to bring functional practices and some
mhm,
of these challenges to light. Um, Back then, it was very, at least in the circles I was running in, people just didn't cross train. Your teacher was not going to be accepting of it.
mhm,
If you went to another teacher and they knew you were training something else, they would be less likely to accept your coming in to train the art. So it used to be very, very unacceptable, at least in the circles I ran, to do it. However, the caveat was always, well, if you've been doing something long enough, right? So I get about 15 or 20 years in, and I start comparing. There's a useful analogy that my sensei Kimo Wall helped me understand, and that he put the martial arts into a college setting. He tried to systematize his teaching in a way that kind of bridged to the Western mentality around education. And so I started using that analogy, and I'm thinking, you go to primary school, you go to high school, at least here in the US, the way that it works, you've got about 12 years of public education, and then you're going to go get 2, 4, 6, or 8 more years of college education. If we make the analogy that the black belt is maybe your primary school years before college, after that, now you've got maybe 8 years after black belt. Well, at that point, I was well into, if you did an analogy, then I have basically a master's degree
mhm,
in Goju-Ryu for what for what it's worth. These are just analogies, right, in terms of time in practice. And I was a diligent training person, right? I trained very, very hard to the limits of my ability. But for me, that was the permission point. It was like, well, if you were talking about any other school of thought, any other skill or knowledge domain, essentially would have a master's degree by the time I'm training 15 or 20 years. I should be allowed to go read another book.
mhm,
And so that became the thing. And of course, over time, it's become very, very popular and much more accepting to cross train. And I certainly I can't suggest to any of my students they don't. Most of my students train multiple things that I train as well. Um, but yeah, the cross training, the funny thing about cross training is I think it's almost impossible to know whether or not it's speeding you up or slowing you down because, you're going to find those, I'll use a business cliche, synergies between some styles, which will accelerate your learning in some ways. You'll also find differences in movement or differences in stance or differences in uh, 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 power or things of that nature that bleed from one art to the other and they actually slow you down. So there's no guarantee that cross training is going to either speed you up or slow you down. I think that has a lot to do with you and the arts that you're cross training.
mhm. For sure, for sure. Some things you can pick up and hinder your development in karate if you want to go that path. The
Hmm.
other one, things accelerate. For me, especially more I look on the katas, it's more grappling based. So
Hmm.
wrestling was the
Hmm.
always that really building up component.
Right.
Um, and I think Goju is very into that close quarter
Yeah.
combat, which my question is, how was for you, what was the differences between going from the Japanese Goju-Ryu
Hmm.
to the Okinawan Goju-Ryu and then
Hmm.
to a Kung Fu? Because
Yeah,
you kind of going upstream more and more to the
right.
very, very source of
Yeah,
karate. What was the
yeah.
jumps and what was the difficulties? Not necessarily a physical one, like a technique ones, but in a way they
Mm.
approach the methodology and
Hmm.
thinking behind it. So what was your
Sure,
mental
sure.
challenges changing those styles?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think to paint a very broad brush, I'm sure other people's experiences will be different, but this was the way that I interpreted those things. For Japanese Goju-Ryu and the USA Goju-Ryu via Peter Urban that had a big effect on Goju-Ryu in the US, there was free sparring from the beginning.
Mhm.
So we always fought very hard. We would put minimal gear on, or if any gear at all, maybe teeth and a very thin hand pad, and we would fight all the way to the ground. There was a lot of very, very hard contact, but it had essentially nothing to do with the kihon or the kata. So the techniques were completely divorced from the training. Conversely, going to a very pure Okinawan Goju-Ryu, the free sparring was much less, if at all. The kata, the body development, the body coordination practice was much more precise. I learned great power development methodologies in
Mhm.
Okinawan Goju-Ryu that helped me a ton when I moved forward into Chinese Fajin methodology. But the challenge then with the Okinawan martial arts was the basis for kumite was either unrealistic or unprogressive, such that you would kind of still be stuck in kind of a memorization mode
Mhm.
rather than a skill development mode, and that became my frustration with the styles of training and teaching typically in Okinawa martial arts. And again, I'm painting a broad brush here. There are great exceptions everywhere. So it's certainly I love Okinawan Goju-Ryu. I think it's a wonderful style. However, as I started to gain experience with Chinese martial arts, Southern Chinese martial arts, White Crane first, what I saw was an idea that there was goals represented by those principles, and they actually gave me some kind of a litmus test to be able to measure um, my bunkai against, right? Because the challenge I had with bunkai there for a while when things got kind of crazy with the bunkai craze was people started, YouTube starts coming up, everybody starts being able to see everything, and then everything is in Goju-Ryu all of a sudden. And it just didn't feel like some of that stuff made sense from the Goju perspective. Not that anybody had a written definition of what Goju-Ryu's principles and methods were, but it just seemed weird. It's like grab this from Krav Maga, grab this from Sistema, grab this from Muay Thai, and all of a sudden people's elbows are everywhere out of Sanchin position, just seem to violate what I thought Goju-Ryu was. So that was a challenge, all right? All of this is cognitive dissonance for me to not feel still. I always had this sense like, so for me, just something isn't right. I just don't feel like I have the complete understanding, the complete picture. I just never felt satisfied in that way. So Chinese martial arts started to give me a theoretical framework to put with the physical framework to help it make more sense to me. So my goal is to flank. What sub skills do I need to be able to flank properly? I need arm drags. I need transfers. I need good footwork. So then you start defining those discrete skills. Well, for each of those skills, do we have good drilling methodology? No, we don't. So we start with static drilling and move up to live drilling and randomize. So um, once you know those things, and you have to figure out a way to fix your training and teaching, and that became a challenge. So, and that's the challenge I'm still in today. I feel like I have good theoretical framework, but styles basically equaling curriculum or teaching methodology. I feel like I still love and teach and practice Goju-Ryu, but I practice it according to a theoretical framework that comes from Southern Chinese martial arts. So that to me is helpful just because you always kind of know the goal and you understand that everything you're doing it is an example of a principle, or there's an ideal and there's the actual, and you're trying to figure out the difference between the ideal and the real. So for me, that's what Chinese martial arts helped me do. Not to say that Chinese martial arts have all the answers. A lot of them struggle with the same problems karate people do. But I think having a written basis for your art over multiple generations helps provide a very simple, straightforward, not always simple and straightforward, helps provide a theoretical framework that you can work from. It helps you define what the style is. I think there's a tendency in karate that people want karate to be everything.
Mhm.
And I think there's a little more pragmatism in Chinese martial arts where people usually in Chinese martial arts will train multiple things. I train Baji for body power. I train Wing Chun for mid-range clinched range. I train Shuai Jiao for my takedowns. Each art is allowed to be a specialty, and people aren't trying to force feed every skill into a single art so they can say their art is complete. There's a little bit of a difference there.
Mhm. It's very interesting. And how? So I've wrote one of my books focusing on the dark side of karate, meaning
Mm,
the um, politics and kind of
yeah.
ownership of a master over the students.
Mm,
Have you noticed the differences between the Chinese approach of that thing and karate? I know that in karate it's not, it's not every dojo, not every organization, but
yeah.
most of my experience going through different organization, there is always some power play and games, and
Yeah.
everybody wants to be a top person. Is that
Yeah.
very similar in Chinese martial arts? Because my understanding of it is based on movies and
Sure,
triads
sure.
and
Yeah, yeah,
secrecy
yeah,
and stuff. So I never trained Chinese martial arts. So
for sure.
could you kind of compare those two briefly?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, again, everything's individualized. My experiences are my own. But I would say anywhere people are, you have very, very similar problems. Some of those problems are even a little bit worse in Chinese martial arts. For instance, there's the concept of bai si. Bai si is to uh, it's a it's a thing you do to be inducted into the family. So
Mhm.
it's a formal ceremony where you're brought in the door. And at that point, you become a legitimate student in the lineage. So usually your name is included in the records of the style so that you're somebody who passes it on. But often, if you're outside the BIC process, you're not getting all the information. If you're in the BIC process, you're kind of expected to be in there forever. This is a big deal.
Mhm.
You don't want to take this very lightly. I actually turned down the opportunity to BIC to one of my teachers because you were joking there, but a lot of kung fu has families have their basis in
Mhm.
gang organizations in different regions of Southeast Asia and Asia. Um, and I don't really want to be a formal member of a gang in Malaysia or the
Mhm.
Philippines or something like that, right? Probably not good for me as a US citizen to be involved formally into something of that nature. You have to be careful. You have to find out what the expectations are of your teacher. So, for instance, I'm considering joining another organization at some point in my life in the future. Having gone through some challenges with teachers and organizations in the past, I now approach this very differently, much more mature. I want to know what their expectations are of me over time in certain situations. What do you expect? Am I here just for money? If there's a bump in the money, are you going to kick me out or ostracize me? Or are we in this for the long haul? Like, are we in this together to carry this knowledge into the future? What are the expectations? So I guess to circle back to your original question, Les, I think everywhere people are, you have the same kinds of politics. You have ego. If there's money involved, the money creates its own problems. If you have rank, rank creates problems. Oh, I got stood on the left side of that guy and I should have been on the right. Or, yeah, I was in the back row and I should have been in the front row. Or, you know, all these things. And honestly, if I could think of a good, clean way to remove the Dan rankings from my karate and Kobudo um, teaching, I really would. I'm constantly thinking about a good way to do that, and haven't come up with anything that I think is going to be workable for me and my students yet. But I do think that it creates more problems than it solves.
Hmm.
I do have, I'm lucky enough to have a number of students who are not at all or very worried about certification or ranks. And they just really love the training. And for me, that brings me a lot of joy because it's not about these artificial milestones. It's about the every chance we get together, let's enjoy the training. Let's see where you're at. Let's move you forward and get that kind of feedback. So yeah, I think we as people bring problems. I know as I've evolved, as I've gotten older and hopefully more mature, I look back at some of my old mindsets, my old approaches, the way I dealt with problems, the way I dealt with relationships, and I take a lot less, um, I cast a lot less judgment on other people and put a lot more on myself because I think I could have handled things differently or better. So I'm trying to evolve in that way. I'm trying to figure out those aspects of leadership that I need to develop in myself to try to create a harmonious space for people so that they can enjoy the training, they can be their best, they can push themselves. But to me, that's important, right? Because I do think martial arts can do a lot of great things for people, but I also realize I can't use myself as the model for what I believe is the right thing or the right approach or the right set of goals. I'm uniquely me. Other people have different goals, different needs, different approaches, preferences, and I need to create a space open enough for that variety while at the same time balancing that with I can't be all things to all people. I can't teach all things. I can't provide everything that everybody would want at my school, so I need to be very open to saying, "Oh, you want that, but I'm not that guy. I know the guy you should go train with. Let me make an introduction." Um, so yeah, I'm trying to look at all these problems I've encountered over the years, Les, and try to figure out a way to not fall into the same pitfalls either I have or that I've seen other people fall into. It's a day by day challenge. I would say I feel a little better at it at my age, but it's a constant challenge. We're all human. We all some day we're not consistent. Some days we're less patient with others. We're less patient with ourselves. Um, and for me personally, I try to. I'm not a good stoic, but I do like to try to embrace some stoic philosophy to help myself stay even keeled and focused on good positive outcomes.
So this is kind of a maintaining your positive mental health well-being, right?
Right.
Which brings me to a question that I ask everybody. What was the impact of the martial arts on your mental health? And kind of conjoined questions, what changes you've seen in your students over the years of practicing martial arts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, um, the original main goal I had was to learn how to defend myself and who knows where I would be today if I got out in the street and had a scrap with somebody. I have a lot more skill, but of course I'm getting older and my attributes are degrading. I've got some health issues that cause me challenges. But I would tell you I have much greater confidence than I had when I was very young. And I know for a fact that confidence has kept me out of a number of fights and dangerous situations. So I feel like there's a confidence that it has helped me gain that I think is incredibly valuable. And I have seen that same thing happen in other people. The confidence from having some ability, but also the confidence to know that, in other parts of your life, for instance, a lot of people go to the military and they go through boot camp and they do something very, very difficult, something
Mhm.
they never thought they could survive. And they come out the other side and they have a confidence they carry into all these other aspects of their life. And for many people who are not in the military, but have gone through old school martial arts training like we did, 30, 40 years ago, the austerity of the training, the difficulty of the training creates this sense of accomplishment that if you can be well the concept today is called anti-fragile, right? Like there
Mhm.
are people there's a challenge to not let ourselves become overly fragile. We want to figure out a way to let adversity help build us up, And I do think martial arts can be good for that if you incubate it in a good environment, right? So we talk about failing safely, and and the other way we joke about that is, you don't want to you don't want your first punch in the face to be on the street. You want it to be from your buddy in the dojo,
Mm.
right? So, um, I think that's a really valuable thing for me, but it's also been valuable for my students to be able to say, look, I've got some difficult things. Obviously, I don't push people the way that I was originally trained. We trained
Mm.
very, very hard. I don't think most people nowadays are looking for the severity of training that I went through in the early days, but I do try to create an environment where two things can happen simultaneously, and it's a difficult balance. It is create a space safe enough to fail in and learn from those failures, um, but simultaneously find and impress upon people that there are plenty of opportunities to push yourself out of your comfort zone, right? So since most growth comes from places of discomfort, I want to remind people that even though it's a safe place, you need to try to push your limits if you want to grow. It's up to you how hard that is. You can tell me, I can hold you somewhat accountable to that and remind you to push yourself, but that's a real delicate balancing act. And I would say I've seen people grow. It makes me tremendously happy when I have students that tell me that the training has been helpful in one way or another, either physically or mentally. But the confidence that comes from training, the confidence of knowing you have some skill, the confidence to simply, or the knowledge, I would just say, to that self-defense largely comes from paying attention to avoiding bad situations, to keeping your temper. Um, these kinds of things, it goes a long way. A lot, it's far better to have those things than to have a skill that you have to use because you lack all the ability to avoid a fight, and you're relying on that skill. Eventually, you're going to get hurt no matter what. So
Very
I'll
true.
stop there, Les. Let me know.
Yeah, very true. So I like describing when I'm talking to people that one of the cool things about karate, and I think that one of the biggest advantages of karate is that built-in control failure system. When you can look back and assess through the belts, and that look, I came as a white belt, I couldn't
Yeah,
do a one push-up.
yeah,
As an example,
yeah,
right? Not very
yeah.
martial, but one push-up. Look, now I'm a green belt, I can do 50 push-ups.
Nice.
So
That's excellent. That's
yeah,
excellent.
you've got that, and tying up with your exploration of no rank system. I tried that for 5 years. We
Yeah.
had no ranks, and the morale went down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
European people like that thing that looking like, look how much I achieved. I've got this
yeah,
belt, and look, I was bad
yeah,
at that belt. So we
yeah,
returned to it. And I know, I'm
yeah.
not sure if you aware of Ken Knight.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
so
listened to a few of his.
Ken tried that as well
Mm,
in his system, but I think he went from white to black. But he noticed that he needs to put a little bit color in there because people
yeah,
crave
yeah,
that. We all like to be
yeah,
praised for good things, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
but I totally agree with you that control failure and building resilience
yeah,
is needed to create a healthy
yeah,
members of the society.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, Les. I mean, there are pros and cons to that whole thing, and I think if you lean into the pros and do what you can to mitigate the cons, I think that's a great way to go. So, for instance, one of the things I loved about training at the Shodokan Goju-Ryu school in Okinawa was when we lined up in a circle. It wasn't by ranks. They didn't really care. You just lined up in a circle. We all trained together. I've taken that. That's been our mode of practice for many, many years. So trying not to let that happen, let problems happen where people are all that worried about where they're standing in the room because of exactly their value to the dojo. It's one of those things we just try to avoid. We rare in our training, we live in a tropical climate in Florida. Our training attire is a school shirt and gi bottoms. Nobody wears belts except for a formal occasion. We treat the full dogi as a as kind of formal attire. It's for testing, it's for when we have guest instructors, those kinds of things. So taking that formality out of it helps reduce that sense of I'm better or worse than you. I have black belts who train with white belts, and sometimes the white belts surprise the black belts, and that's a wonderful thing.
Mm.
It helps keep the black belts humble. It helps everybody remember we're all here to work together and train together. And I think, it can be challenging if you build a very strict hierarchy of senpai kohai behaviors into the culture of the dojo. I think that's where things start to go awry, or I've seen them go awry. And so I just try to do my best, and maybe we just stay the course again based on other people's experience. I'll chat with you later about more of your feedback on that. I appreciate your experience in trying that out. Um, but yeah, I think I feel happiest when I have students who enjoy the training and are not motivated. They're motivated by the day-to-day activities as opposed to the specific belt goal. But I also understand everybody's different. Some people need the belt goal. They like the belt goal. It means things to them. It's easy for me to look back and say, it's rank isn't that big of a deal because I've already accumulated rank myself. So it's easy to say, oh no, I don't need those training wheels. Well, but they need the training wheels, right? So you have to be able to keep them.
Yeah, so for us in our dojo, we kept. I tried again without the ceremonial stuff, but I noticed that people like that a little bit of a militaristic approach. So we do the opening and closing
Sure.
ceremony, but the belt is an outcome of your training. It's not something we
Yeah.
strive. I do belt assessments once a year, and
Oh,
if you
nice.
put up effort and you improve, you get the belt. If not, not. We got only
Next.
four colors, so there's no pressure. But for myself with my downgradings, I always been forced to do them. I
Yep.
never
Yep.
go out and beg for it.
hmm
And I think
hmm
that it's rubs from your teacher, right? The instructor, main instructor in a dojo sets up the atmosphere. They willingly or unwillingly copying you. So if they see
Absolutely.
that the belt is, sometimes I might be somebody comes without a belt, I give them my black belt and I train without a belt, right? It
There
doesn't
you go.
really matter. It's just the
Right.
piece of the cloth, and it kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know, it gives your it's not so much of a presentation to other people, but it's more of a confirmation of your achievements. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because I'm not very clear with the description of my. I've got a
Well,
chaos in the head always. So
I thought you were very clear. Um, you are right. Like you are teaching people around you, even when you don't believe you're teaching. All your
Mm,
actions are visible to those around you. So I think we always have to be careful, especially if we're in a leadership role, that our actions match our intentions and our goals, so that we're teaching the right things. So if you're concerned about topic X, like rank, then your students are going to be. If you're more
mm,
concerned about this kind of training or socialization, your students are either going to gravitate in that direction, or the students you attract will be of a like nature, right? So since like
mm,
attracts like, and there's a gravity to an environment that attracts people that are similar. Um, to me, that's somewhat of a proof point that I look around the people and I'm very proud of the kinds of people that I have chance to be on the floor with. Um, we just we get a jerk in once in a while, and we find a way to remind them that this is not the location for them,
yeah.
right? Either directly or indirectly. Um, I forget. There was another thing you mentioned, but I'm sure I'll figure it out again.
That's all right. It happens all the time to me. You're gonna
Yeah,
remember it tomorrow, 1 o'clock in the morning.
I
You're gonna
will.
wake up.
I will.
Yes, that's the that's the thing I was gonna ask.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
said about the changing goals of your martial art career, if we can call it like this.
Sure.
I went through that as well. So went from the sporting aspect, from self-defense aspect to the sporting aspect, back to self-defense, and
hmm
now I end up on the conclusion that overall health and mental health is the thing that I really, really want
hmm
to explore, and that's what makes me happy. And I don't need
Yeah.
to actually prove to anybody my value anymore because I
Right.
done that. I've proven
Yeah.
to myself my worth.
Yeah.
It took me
Yeah.
a long with my anxiety. It was a bumpy journey.
Yeah.
But how was that for you? What stages you went, and what made pivots in your growth?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a lot, right? So I mentioned early on, my goal was purely self-defense. And then my goal became this strange journey to find the Holy Grail, right? What's the original correct and true right answer, right? To be right and true and to be doing the correct thing. That took so many forms over the years. Um, so looking for Hakutsuru katas and
Mm-hmm.
looking for the right and correct bunkai and understanding all these things. But you know, uh, ultimately, where I've landed that makes me very happy is understanding that I train martial arts for several reasons. I train it now for physical health, for mental health. For physical health comes in a few parts, right? One is the pure self-defense skills aspect. The other is just training your body to be able to continue to function, right? So uh, a buddy of mine likes to talk about the Okinawan perspective on this, and I can understand why this is important, right? So um, in modern times, we're not going to pick up a kama or a sai and
Mm-hmm.
defend our family. Most likely, it's pretty. Although things are kind of strange right now, um, uh, but everybody's fighting diabetes and heart disease
Mm-hmm.
and mobility issues. And so we need to fight those things. We have a lot of people in our communities who are overweight or out of shape or very fragile physically. So, I mean, we all need some form of exercise, but there's also the socialization aspect. There are a lot of adults who just do not have adult friends and adult hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really surprised, at least in the US and my communities, how few people, if you don't, I mean, some people have church groups that create socialization. I find that a lot of people, if they don't have that, it's fairly rare that adults have friends that they get together with on a regular basis, do anything physical at all. If they get together, it's to drink beer and watch sports or something of that nature. Um, the quality of the discussion isn't that high because it's superficial. It's not good discussion about philosophy and ideals and ethics and talking about ideas, which I think is actually you know, something really fun to do, which is kind of people I enjoy chatting with. Um, so for me, there's the physical aspects, there's the social aspects, um, and then there's the learning aspects. I get to continue to learn about language and history and culture and geography, which is enriching for me. I need to continue to always have mental stimulation. Um, and so some of that I can do when I'm alone, some of that I can do together with people when we're out for lunch. Sometimes it's when we're on the dojo floor and we're training. Sometimes we're on the dojo floor and we're exploring ideas. And sometimes we're studying and sometimes we're training. And when we're training, we're very focused on the doing. And when we're studying, we're collectively problem solving and analyzing and trying to work through progressions. So um, where I am today is enjoying that with people and trying to continue to find other people who want to do that with us. And then as a teacher, my goal is to continue to solidify good curriculum so that I can teach uh, in my remaining teaching years and do a good job. Because there's another aspect that we hadn't really touched on yet, and that is there's some there's some responsibility I feel to certain teachers, and that honoring those teachers and their legacies and their approaches and their information is a piece of what's important to me as well. So the collective legacy of the art and my teacher and eventually my legacy to my students, whatever that means, eventually to me that's also important because I want to source the information as it's come, and I think that's important in a traditional martial art. I care about functionality, but I'm also a traditionalist, so I balance in my mind the conservatism that comes from being in a traditional martial arts and the progressive nature of wanting to improve things and be a part of improving process or approach or people. Um, that's really important to me. So I've only recently started teaching Tai Chi, although Tai Chi is probably the thing I know the least. Um, but to me, I know there are some people in my life and in my local community who would greatly benefit from Tai Chi. And so I've started teaching some private lessons and some group lessons. And it really touches my heart that I can have a way to help people learn their bodies in a healthier way, to develop better posture, to develop better movement patterns. Um, that there's a tremendous, uh, there's a lot of value in it. Value. It makes me feel good to do good for other people. There's an element of that service to others that's important to me. So sometimes that service is to the martial ancestors. Sometimes it's to my direct teachers, some of whom have passed and some are still alive. Um, but being a part of something bigger than myself is also important.
I'm very glad to hear that you started to work with people with Tai Chi. So one of my longest programs is prevention of loneliness and isolation in elderly, and I use
Yeah,
slow
yeah,
kata meditation
yeah.
movements,
It's
and that's going
fantastic.
for nearly 10 years now. God, 10 years
Wow.
already. And we've got a group
Congratulations.
of 20 people, and it's growing, and we're working with our local government now to get more people into that kind of stuff. And it's not only the physical movement, but like I like to describe it that I have individuals coming to the group, and now they are one unit. You came with people who had no connection to a group of people that in Christmas time going for markets together, they're going gardening club together. So you
Right.
created the support group. They don't really need me anymore. I
Isn't that
was just
wonderful?
somebody who linked them together, and I can leave them around. So we always do after our training cup of tea and biscuits. So we sit there, and sometimes I just can scoop back, sit back, and watch how they're interacting together. And it's very,
Yeah.
very rewarding. And giving back to
Yeah.
the community is always very,
Yeah.
very rewarding. So
It really is.
glad to hear that you dipping your toes into that kind of
Yeah.
work. You said about your curriculum, and this is an interesting topic for me as well. We might be completely on opposite ends of what's needed in the curriculum, but mine is like 7 point something now because I'm constantly changing and working on it, and
Sure, sure.
I'm starting to throw stuff away, and
Yeah.
because we're doing like more of a kind of sporting approach, so we go
Mm.
groundwork,
Hmm.
stand-up throws, punches,
Hmm.
kickboxing, everything is mixed in it.
Yeah.
Um, what is your current version? How many versions you've done before, and what you are fitting into your curriculum at the moment? Because I'm sure it's going to change with the years. But what
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
important for you now in the curriculum, and how do you build in it?
Yeah. 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 Before I answer the question about curriculum, I just want to touch on a couple things you said just a second ago. Um, you mentioned feeling like with your group that they don't need you anymore.
Hmm.
I'm really glad you mentioned that because that's actually been a strange goal of mine as a teacher, is to build self-sufficient students
Hmm.
and giving them the rather than giving them the answers, giving them the formulas so that they can see that everything I've given them is just an example of what's in the formula and that they can take that formula and solve their own problems, makes me redundant so
Hmm.
that at some point they don't need me anymore. And that's actually a goal. I want to be wanted but not needed.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Actually, speaking of Ken Knight again, because he had the
Yeah.
accident in his finger.
Oh, right.
Um, that was what happened to him. He realized that actually he trained his group so well they don't need him. But
Right.
then he was like, I'm not needed anymore. I feel sad
Right.
because
Right. Right.
you want to be wanted, but there is
Sure.
kind of I never been in that situation, but him being forced to be in that situation,
Yeah.
it's kind of mixed emotions because you done a great job, you're proud of it, but then you think
Yeah.
like, shit, if they just kick me out, I'm out, and there's no problem. They don't need me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a challenge as a teacher. Well, it's a challenge for anybody creating any kind of an intellectual property. But let's say as an instructor, once you put something out, it's out there.
Mm,
It's basically impossible to put a stamp on something and say this can't go anywhere. Restricting information is really quite impossible. And you really shouldn't want to have that goal. Now, the goal of I say should. I used a trigger word for some people. Um, in my opinion, You have to understand as an instructor that once you teach something, it's out there. You can't control it. It can morph, it can be misunderstood, it can be taken and rebranded, and all those things are possible. But I think you have to be willing to let go to be able to be a teacher. So you have to know that that's an eventuality. Some students will leave you prematurely. You can't control that, and
Mm.
you have to leave that where it is. I mean, it explains a lot of problems in the martial arts when students leave prematurely, but at the same time, we're all individuals and we all get to have that freedom, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned the socialization aspect. I just want to touch on this real quick before I get back to curriculum. Um, I heard somewhere along the line this pillar of like five things that are important, and it's become
Mm.
kind of an important framework for me in my life. And it is that for health, you need regular exercise, healthy food, sufficient sleep, access to sunlight,
Hmm.
and good socialization. And
Hmm.
so those five things being important, I try to remind myself on a regular basis to do all those things. And I'm an introvert. I know sometimes it doesn't appear that way. All my communication and leadership skills are skills. They take work, they take a lot of energy out of me. I look forward all year to the workshops that I do, but when they're done, I am done. Like I
Hmm.
am, I mean, it drains all the energy out of me to be turned on during that time. So, but I also crave socialization in certain respects, right? But I don't do small talk. I like to talk
Ah,
about
I
cool
can't do that
ideas, right?
either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that either.
I'm not into sports. I can't talk about sports teams, but I can talk about philosophy and religion and politics and all kinds of and sociology and all the interesting topics to me. But yeah, so those five pillars to me are very, very important. I try to work regularly on those to become a healthier person. And I just try to remind my students that they need those things when they're out of balance and we talk about it. It's like, well, yeah, you haven't been sleeping well. You need to figure out a way. Oh,
Mm.
your sleep and exercise are tied together. If you exercise more, your sleep is a higher quality. That's an important, relationship. If you're not getting enough sunlight, the quality of food that you're eating is not going to matter as much because you can't metabolize the vitamin D that you need to metabolize your magnesium, right? So
Mhm.
there are all these interrelationships between these things. If you don't socialize enough, you've got higher cortisol levels. You're not going to be as healthy. So there, it's all not only a process but an ecosystem inside of our mind, uh, and our mind and body are one, right? So we need to
Yeah.
take care of it all.
I live in UK and I've got little children, so I'm deprived of most of those.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, hopefully you can overdose on one and try to balance it out. But
Yeah, no,
um,
I can't complain.
yeah, good, good. Regarding curriculum, um, since I teach several arts and I study several more, curriculum's kind of a shifting concept depending on which art we're talking about. But what I have done is I've boiled down the general concepts to four main components that I treat every art that I consider in every art in the same way. So the first one is the theoretical stuff. It's the history, morality, the teaching theory, the training theory, all the stuff that we would talk about on a podcast, um, or over lunch after training, which is one of the best places to do that, right? Um, the next is body development, and that's all the stuff that just both general and sports specific, getting your body to be both healthy and become like an athlete's or a fighter's body. And every art treats that stuff differently, and some of them ignore it. Some of them have a great rubric for it. Like one of the strengths of Goju-Ryu is the founder spent time with a doctor and put together Hojo Endo and Jumbi Endo
Mhm.
and really tried to focus on that aspect of the curriculum. And other styles have just pulled in like military style physical education. Others have pulled in modern biomechanical training, which is great. So there's all the body development stuff. So every art has that slightly differently. Karate and Kobudo have that differently than some of the styles of Kung Fu. Like in Kung Fu, we'll do a lot more iron palm training,
Mhm.
but the grip strength training is very similar in Goju-Ryu as it is in all the Southern Chinese arts. So you can see a very direct correlation there. Um, And then there's body coordination. That's what most of us think about. It's kata, it's combinations, it's individual movements, it's footwork practice. It's just about all the stuff that's solo, um, and any of the memorized stuff that's partner based. And those three pillars all just exist to get you to the place where you can start building skills. In my mind, the idea of a martial art being the goal is to develop skills. All these other things we've talked about today are some of the wonderful side benefits, but the core concept of the martial art is the development of a physical skill. So that's the rough heading that I use to define the curriculum for everything I teach. So I try to make sure that we have good theory, everybody understands why we're doing everything we're doing, which is something I did not have growing up. So what I expected in a martial art was to have answers to questions, and instead I was told, you know, we I was told in many ways that those answers didn't exist. If they did, we were creating them, or shut the hell up and get back to training, or things of that nature. Um, I try not to be that teacher, and if somebody asks me a question that I don't have an answer for, I try to be honest and just say I don't know, or I'll look that up, or I'll point you to somebody who can answer that question. So that's a thing I try to do better than my teachers.
Mm.
Um,
I-
Go
Interestingly,
ahead.
you said that you teaching depending on which art you're teaching, then you do different curriculum. And I've
Mhm.
got that same with my wife. My wife is a kung fu, aikido, and karate trained person, and judo when she was little.
Mhm.
And those shall not meet. They are in their own uh,
Yeah.
draws, and they don't come
Yeah.
up together. She's an
Right.
engineer as well, and my theory
Ah,
is
yes.
that is the engineering mind, because for me,
Yes. Yes.
everything I learn automatically gets incorporated. I
Yeah.
cannot separate stuff up. It all's like a big mush. So I keep
Yeah.
saying, my drawers was taken out and the child
Yeah.
was there and just dumped everything in together.
Nice.
So it is very interesting for me how the different individuals' brains either I can never can pronounce this, compartmentalize. Is that
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
Put it
Compartmentalize. Yeah.
separately. Just,
Yeah.
this is one word which my brain, my tongue can't do it in English.
Yeah.
And the others mix everything together.
Yeah.
So for you do you think that's the engineer in you going there? No, we cannot put them together. They're different systems. They're gonna crash.
Yeah, I would say there's a few things going on at play for me here, Les, is one is me. I think of like eating.
Hmm.
The food's in different spots on the plate. I eat it, it all comes into me, it all mixes together. That's true for me. I internalize it that way. I cross-reference this idea related to this. Oh, it's a little different, but it's similar. But that gives me a new word or a new idea or a new drill for something I already understand. So who am I? I am the net sum of all my experience.
Hmm.
When I teach, though, I have not made a decision to throw away the labels that I was given. I still have some responsibilities to people
Hmm.
and to traditions to honor. So I do my best to honor them in the way that I can. Now, I'm not saying I teach things unchanged, although I'll say this a little more specifically. Goju-Ryu, I don't change the kata. The techniques are all the same. How I teach it, 100% different than I was taught. But that's the teaching methodology. The goal of what you should attain is the same. The way I get you there is 100% different than ever I was taught. Kobudo, I teach all the same techniques. I don't change them. There's a little more theory that comes from Southern Chinese martial arts. I teach about 80% the same as I was taught. About 20% of things are new drills, or I change the order of things a little bit, or I teach some extra ideas or extra combinations, things like that. So I change it just a little bit. The Kung Fu, depending on what I'm doing, I'll teach it exactly the way my teacher did, or I'll teach it completely differently. But the goal, again, the techniques are all the same. I don't change that. The forms are the same. I don't change the forms. But how you practice and how you teach for me is all free, without constraint, without
Hmm.
constraint. So I will create 5 drills in a class. If I'm smart enough, I'll remember to go back and write them down so I can reuse them and not have to, create them on the fly again. But just for me, the general idea is I know what the goal is. The path to that goal is different through every individual I teach. One of the first lessons I learned as a teacher was, the best plan fails when it meets the first student. So, um,
Yeah.
I thought teachers created lesson plans, and lesson plans were everything we were going to do in this class, and hit my first student, and it just didn't work out. And I needed to realize that the plan wasn't as important as the goal. And
Mm,
so learning to let go of that piece of maybe what came from my engineering background as the process is most important, really the outcome is the most important.
mm,
So let go of the process, be okay with changing that or knowing that my idea as a teacher that this was going to be the right process really didn't turn out to be accurate, and that every individual you work with, like I heard you talking with Tuwari, um, teaching 100 students, how can you do that effectively? I find that very challenging to imagine.
mm.
I work best in a group of even numbered people up to about 12,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there I can have a chance to bounce in and out, being a partner with everybody so they can feel it. I can feel it. And one of my teachers said, the way you learn Kung Fu is the teacher puts the skill in your hands,
Hmm.
puts it through tactile use. You don't explain it, you don't just show it. You do those things, plus you get in and you feel, you receive and you send.
Mm.
And that's how you do the test, right?
Yeah, feeling is believing, as my German
Yeah,
friend says.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
if you had only a few words to describe your core motto or core principles, what that would be? Should I give you an example, or is it clear what I say?
Please, I'd love an example because I'm
So this is asked by one of my favorite people on the planet, Hanshi Mark House, who is a children development teacher and also a Kyokushin guy. Wrote really good books, and he said that, if you take everything away, what's left, so you show your child a plaque, and they know what your school or home is about. So
mm,
for me, it's strong and caring, because if you're
mm,
strong, you can care of others or you
mm,
and yourself.
mm,
And the same is for my
mm,
karate.
mm.
We have a saying that the strong and caring people are the pillars of society, and
Nice,
karate helps to cultivate them.
nice.
But if you boil it down to a couple of words, strong and caring, that's our motto. That's what we've got by the doors at home. So every time kids going past, they see it, they reinforces that's what I want them to be.
Yeah.
What would be your school and your private one?
Wow. I mean, I honestly, Les, I'm going to have to think on this for a while because just the way that my brain works. But there's one thing that keeps coming back to me that you just triggered me to think of, and that is I saw this saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
go far, go together. I
Hmm.
think that's really important because, like, I have dojo mentors and advisors, and I think, for the challenges and the successes of my personal mental health over the years and working through challenging mindsets into healthier ones, I think the the benefit I've had has been in having mentors in my life who I can have good, deep conversations with. And you could call them my counselors, you could call them my therapists. Um, but I think having good, caring people in your life who you can throw ideas down and get get either enhancements or refinements or tempering or smashing and replacing your ideas with better ones. For me, that's all come through the mentors, the people I've been able to surround myself with. So yeah, I think we all need a team around us. It takes a village, I think is another way of saying the same thing. I think that's true for me personally, and I think that's true for the dojo. I think, even though I bring some things to my students, my other mentors and senior advisors in the dojo do as well. And then I also appreciate that sometimes my students come back and they offer me valuable thoughts and advice and help in ways that are great for me. So I just think the community of the martial arts is super valuable. Um, Partly why I love the training, and we don't really like to suffer fools at the dojo. If
Hmm.
if you're Gakia Sensei was really big on the concept of harmony. And I think that makes sense, right? Harmony is what we're looking for. We're looking for a place where if we're not enjoying what we're doing, we should go do something else. Um, if we don't have some value coming out of it, if there's no joy in it, it's like this is Marie Kondo and her cleaning out your closet, right? You pick it up. If it doesn't bring you joy, you get rid of it. Well, I feel
Yeah,
the same way with the martial arts. If there's no joy in it, what's the point?
awesome. Um,
Yeah.
I would love to have you again on my podcast to talk maybe more technical stuff. I am
Sure.
kind of time constrained because kids are
Mhm.
off school here for 2 weeks, and I can hear them already trying to
Oh,
rip
excellent.
their selves to shreds. And wife is on a more important meeting, put it that way. She's the engineer.
Understood.
She's the main feeder for the family. So,
Understood.
but I
Understood.
would love to get you back on
Sure.
the podcast and talk more technical stuff about Goju-Ryu because I
Sure,
really
sure.
loved your book.
Oh, thank you.
Can you say where to find your books, where to find your online coaching, and everything that
Yeah.
you can share?
Thanks, Les. Yeah, I appreciate it. The book is called Principle Driven Skill Development. That was the first book I wrote. It's available on Amazon. It's now been translated into several other languages, Spanish, Italian, German, Dutch. So very appreciative of those translators that have been involved in the project. I've also written a small student manual on five ancestor boxing from the Fujian province. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, there's some good information in there. There's a small book. And then there's also, I think this book is very interesting, or should be to Okinawan martial artists who are interested in things like the Okinawan Bubishi. The Bubishi is a small fight book, or
Mhm.
we call it a chuanpu in Chinese martial arts. It's meant to contain kind of the encapsulated and coded knowledge of a style, and that's very similar to the Bubishi. So I did a translation of one from Taizu, which is Grand Ancestor Boxing. Small book. It's also available. It's called Fujian Taizu Boxing. And it's all my books are on Amazon. My website is burinkan.org. That's burinkan.org. You can find information there on my distance learning courses. I have one for five ancestor boxing, one for Madyoshi Kobudo, and now one for Haka martial arts. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing what the style of teaching is that I actually do based on the things that I've talked about on podcasts or online, you can get some recordings of some classes and see specifically what it means when I say, principle driven skill development. So appreciate
Awesome.
the opportunity, Les. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Take
Speak
care.
to you soon. Well done for listening to all of it. You are a superhero. Thank you very much for your support. And if you could leave us that review on a podcast platform, that would be amazing. I appreciate your time, appreciate your support, and I wish you all the best until the next one.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.